Greetings, good storytellers. I am the Artful Narrator, and it is my privilege to welcome you to learning the tropes of writing. Now, I am a firm believer in the idea that tropes are inherently neither good nor bad, but are merely tools, and as such, it is entirely reliant upon us as the architects of the story, as the creators of the narrative, to use these tropes in innovative and beautiful ways to make a truly excellent story. However, it is also true that some tropes, by the psychology that is attached to them, by the history that they evoke, by the themes that are irrevocably attached to them, they can be so difficult to handle that their very presence in your story, the very knowledge that this trope exists in your narrative, may be a deal breaker for some people and make them unwilling, or at the very least reluctant, to experience the story that you've created. And while I'm sure that your mileage may vary, and we all have our personal tastes, it is probably safe to say that there aren't that many people who, upon hearing that the prophecy trope is used in a story, will instantly go, nah, I don't even want to. I've seen that too many times. I know it's going to allow the main character to become important and go on adventures, but I've seen it too many times. Skip. No thanks. I'm sure there are a few people like that, but not nearly as many as this trope, which warrants, and as a pet owner I have to agree warrants, rightly so, a website called doesthedogdie.com, which informs you if the media that you are watching contains today's trope, which is kick the dog, with a nod to or rather it's today's trope, kill the dog, with a nod to kick the dog, more extreme versions of the same idea. Now, narratively, the purpose for this trope is very simple, almost deceptively so. It is part of a class of tropes that I would call almost sort of writer's shorthand tropes. They are tropes that are designed to evoke a reaction from the audience. And it's in as, shall we say, a simple a manner as possible. Just elegantly create this reaction. But being shorthand, they've been done so many times that most of them are quite cliche. In this same category, you have tropes like I forget what it's called, but it's basically the idea of, I only have 3 days until retirement type of thing that you see in some movies, or the war movie staple of, this is my last mission, I'm going home in 3 days, my wife, here's a photo of her, we're having our first kid, isn't it great? All these are things designed to, with limited information about a character, make you sympathize with them and care for them, so that you will be probably, feel something and be sad when they inevitably die. Because let's face it, if you take out a photo of your wife, or your loved one and your partner, anything like that, in a war movie, and say this is your last mission or you're getting close to retire, you might as well be wearing a red shirt. You're dead. It's sad. And in the same vein, the kick the dog / kill the dog trope is there to make us hate the perpetrator who did this. Without any other reason, we see this as an unbridled act of cruelty. And as pet owners, it is, I admit that yes, anytime I see that movie, that is just no, instantly hate that character. But this, just because it is an efficient way to evoke that reaction, and to make us despise the person who did this dastardly deed, that does not mean that it is not without its risks, because despite being deceptively simple, the stakes are quite high with it. Now, I do not pretend to fully understand why we view the assault on a dog as such a more egregious and vicious act in a narrative than an attack on another person, because within the same context of a nameless dog appearing on screen for perhaps mere seconds and then having a villain attack it, we are vastly more shocked than we are if a human, let us say, so as not to be gender specific, appears on screen and is quickly killed. we would certainly be shocked, yes, but there wouldn't be the same level of just aghast pain and outrage. I'm sure there's lots of psychology involved in this. Perhaps the sort of the implicit idea that animals are by their very nature somehow more innocent in their simplicity, whereas humans with all our complexity, you would need to know, well, is the person that just died more good or more evil? Were they one of the villains of this show? I don't know, but if it's a dog, you assume, well, it's just an innocent bystander. Or it could be that, hopefully one of the worser things that any one of us has experienced, especially at a younger age, might be the death of a pet, rather than a Batman-esque, both our parents getting killed so that we can have the type of origin needed to launch us into a superhero career. And so perhaps it's more easy for us to relate to the situation that way. I don't know. But regardless, the emotions that it creates are so strong that these emotions can either just make you feel so negative about the story that you don't even want to continue, or make you irritated at the writer for implementing this trope. Because let's face it, as the writers, anything that a character does in the story, we crafted the narrative so that they would do it. So even though we want the audience to be angry at the villain that did this, well, we wrote the villain to do that, so we're just as guilty. But again, this is a tool, and it can be used well, but it is harder to use well. Now, for a slightly negative, or at least, cautionary example, I will use, and I don't like to use full-on negative examples, but, I think this will work out for the juxtaposition. Now, in the season 3 of MacGyver, wonderful 80s classic with Richard Dean Anderson, pre-Jack O'Neill, Stargate Richard Dean Anderson, with his mohawk, I said it again, mohawk, with his mullet, business up front, party in the back, iconic. Heck. But in season 3, there are no less than 3 instances where a dog dies in a plot. And it wears you down. And to at least the writer's credit, there are 3 radically different, or at least appreciably different examples of different uses of this trope. The first use of it, that I believe it's in an episode Fallout. Kind of check that. I'll put the correct name up there. This is the 5th or 6th time I've recorded it, and this is the first time that I didn't have the list up, and now I can't remember. So I think it's Fallout. In that, it's just sad. It's well implemented, at least in that there's the appropriate gravity to the dog's death, so it's not being used frivolously, but it just makes you miserable, and I believe that's their intent, so good job, but it doesn't mean you want to watch the episode a second time after you've seen it. It's just sad. But, oh well. The next one is The Negotiator. This is arguably one of the better implementations of it in terms of the, today's discussion, because it's the classic. It is an action carried out by an antagonist, and by doing so, it both makes us dislike them, and it also amps the stakes up. And it is done in such a way that it does what I believe the trope is designed to do at its best, which is it gives you an insight into the character's psychology. Are they someone who is so cruel, so thoughtless that just they don't even associate it, wounding a dog as something that you even need to give a second thought to? Or are they calculating and they believe that this will be something that will inspire shock and fear and dread even in the protagonist? And so here it is better used. Still sad, but at least better used. But the third instance in the spoilers is just, it's reprehensible, because it is, as I said, this trope is designed to make you dislike the antagonists and root for their demise. Something that is not hard to do, and there are other ways to do it, but it is a tool. But in this episode, the writers do not understand the gravity of it, because in this episode, where the antagonists are a company that is dumping toxic waste in the wilderness, we see within the first few minutes of the story, they dump toxic waste, a dog comes along, the waste flows into a stream, and further downstream, a man's walking his dog comes along, drinks from it, dies. And it's not a friend of MacGyver's, it's not his dog, there's not a direct connection there, it's just there to horrify us and to drive home the shock of that, yes, dumping toxic waste is bad. But why do we need something like they are using a bazooka to take care of something that a fly swatter could take care of? I have no better analogy. They're driving home this plot instead of with just a small hammer. They're driving it home with a sledgehammer or a gigantic Iron Man suit powered fist that not only drives it home but just breaks the nail, breaks the wall behind it, and just breaks our enjoyment of the story. Yeah, because I mean, they're a company dumping toxic waste. Did the writers really think, wow, these people, this faceless company is just so charismatic? I don't think the audience can get behind MacGyver taking them down. I mean, we're in danger of them becoming the new central characters of the story. We need to be sure that we squash that by making them as reprehensible as possible, despite the fact that they already are dumping toxic waste. They don't understand They don't understand that this is a trope that needs to be handled with sensitivity and respect. It's not just something that you can throw out there, despite that being what its origins were as a quick way to get that reaction, because you can evoke too much of reaction. So, with that being hopefully explained, let's look at the good example of it. And one of the reasons that helps me to have that belief that tropes are neither good nor bad. Because prior to this movie coming out, you would have had to really make a good argument to me as to, can this trope even be done well? Well, and aside from like the classic family dog movie sort of thing, where somehow a lot of times they have dogs dying in it, and it's tragic and sad. And why is this a movie? I don't know. But I mean, in terms of this being an act of someone attacking the dog, but this movie, no surprise, is John Wick. One of my all-time favorite action movies. Brilliant on so many levels, especially in the complexity of the way that it builds the character of John Wick and the narrative with minimal exposition, allowing you to see rather than be told the fear in these mobsters. And you can see their power, their position, their strength, but they're afraid of this guy, this just simple guy, John Wick, who's just there driving his car. But yet you come to learn that he is the Baba Yaga. He's this boogeyman type figure, this indestructible force. And once you rile him, be ready to meet your proverbial maker. In John Wick, they do several things excellent in the way that they implement the kick the dog, kill the dog trope. The first is that the implementation of the trope in itself is a bit of a subversion, because this story is framed in sort of the classic, revenge action movie style. And normally in such movies, it's, a wife or a girlfriend or, perhaps a daughter or sister, loved one. Usually female, which means that it crosses over into the women in refrigerators trope, which that one I have yet to find a positive example of. I'm going to keep trying, but yeah, I really hate that trope. But so right off the bat, getting brownie points because they're doing something different. They're taking the story and bringing it in a new direction while still having that emotional tie, because the dog is the final gift from John Wick's wife, who dies of medical complications. So there's still that connection there. But like I said, we already have a subversion, so that's very good. The second thing they do is they fully respect just the rage and the outrage that this act causes, with these gangsters coming there, beating up John Wick so they can steal his car, and then just thoughtlessly kicking the dog aside. They don't even really focus on it. And the movie from that point onward balances the two different halves of, or the two different perspectives that you can have about this trope. One is the more logical. Well, I mean, it is just a dog. That's, as a pet owner, I don't feel that way, but I can understand. Well, it's just a dog. In the scale of things, does the dog's murder really, does avenging that really entail killing, scores and scores and scores of underworld figures? Who knows? And this is further highlighted throughout the movie by having the rather, self-aware thugs occasionally go, "It was just an effing dog." But this is then countered by, display, by having the ultra-violence and the style with which all these characters are mercilessly killed. It speaks to the pet owner side, the emotional side of the pet owner, where it's like, Hell yes, it's a dog. That's my friend. And how could you do that? There's no number of murders or of evil villains is enough until you get the actual guy that was responsible. Until you get that gangster's son, and then I'm sorry, the debt of blood has not been paid. It's excessive, but it speaks to that purely emotional side of just, I hate this character. I want to see him die as painfully as possible. And if other people get in the way along the path, John Wick, mow them down. It's all good. And just the writer's perfect understanding of this trope, and the fact that they are both intelligent about it and self-aware with it, but also fully appreciate the gravity that it creates in the story, is wonderful, because they are being truly sensitive about the use of it, and through all these other elements blend the narrative into something that is far more beautiful and dynamic than just a story where a dog dies. So whether you are a pet owner or not, and whether this is something that raises the same horror in you when you see it, that as a writer, this is something that's important to consider, because tropes like this are things that, without the necessary understanding, we could use flippantly. Just, for the purpose that they were originally intended. If we put this into the story, I will reap the reaction that I desire with as few steps as possible. And writing is a complex thing, certainly, and stories are so vast, and there's so many different nuances to them, that it is perfectly reasonable for us to try to take shortcuts sometimes, and to find, as efficient ways as possible to bring out some of these emotions, because not necessarily everything in the story either needs or we have the time as writers to craft the kind of narrative that takes you to those emotional highs of joy and triumph, and down to those depths of despair, all in an organic and fluid process. Sometimes we need to punch those buttons to just get that quick reaction for something that isn't as vital. But there are tropes like this that have a larger impact than we realize, and so we as writers need to be aware of that, sympathetic of the emotions that it evokes, so that we can decide if the inclusion of it in our story is worth it, because we are going to give it the respect it requires, or if it may be more advantageous to instead bypass it and use some other trope when it is merely the reaction from the characters and the audience that we desire, rather than necessarily the deed itself, because there are many ways to make antagonists reprehensible, many ways to get the audience on your side, or to evoke shock, or pull the audience in without necessarily using this. But as I said, this is one of many tools in your proverbial tool belt as a writer. So decide how best to implement it in your narrative. But beyond that, as always, I hope that in some way this video has been informative, or at the very least, a pleasant diversion. And until next time.